Imagine starting your morning knowing that every trip to the bathroom today will be a strategic operation, part acrobatics, part engineering, and part social performance. You are not just wearing clothes, you are wearing a personal fortress, a carefully constructed monument to fashion made of steel hoops, mountains of petticoats, and enough fabric to upholster a small sitting room. The moment you wake, your body is claimed by this elaborate structure. A thin linen chemise clings to your skin as the base layer, a modest barrier meant to protect your fine garments from sweat or oils. Then comes the corset, drawn so tightly your ribs feel as though they're shifting into a new shape, followed by petticoat upon petticoat, each one adding bulk, each one making your silhouette grander. Finally, the crowning marvel, the crinoline, an enormous cage of steel hoops bound together with fabric tapes, expanding around you like a portable gazebo. This crinoline might reach 5, sometimes 6 feet in diameter, a circumference so imposing that turning sideways to pass through a doorway becomes an acquired skill. Sitting requires calculation. Dancing is choreography with built-in hazards. And the simple act of walking down the street transforms into a lesson in balance, as your skirts sway and sway again, each motion dictated by the physics of the steel hoops beneath. Yet none of these challenges compare to the ultimate daily puzzle. How, in all of this, do you go to the toilet? Victorian women lived in an age where politeness ruled over practicality, where the most basic bodily functions were swaddled in layers of silence, and where a hint of impropriety could damage a reputation beyond repair. To society, you were an ornament, graceful, composed, untouchable. Behind the scenes, however, you were also a master strategist, navigating a private battlefield where chamber pots, hidden rooms, and ingenious clothing designs allowed you to maintain dignity in impossible circumstances. It wasn't just about the sheer bulk of what you wore. Weight mattered too. That ensemble you carried all day could weigh 20 pounds or more. Add to that the constant pressure of the corset, compressing your lungs, your stomach, even your digestion. And you begin to see why answering nature's call was never as simple as slipping into a restroom. For many women, it wasn't even possible without assistance. Ladies' maids became experts in managing the operation, able to position skirts, shift petticoats, and keep everything discreet while avoiding a catastrophic tangle of steel and silk. The chamber pot was your constant companion, though it rarely appeared in plain sight. In wealthier homes, these vessels were hidden in furniture so beautifully made that no guest would suspect their true purpose. Some looked like upholstered chairs, others like small cabinets carved with floral designs. In the right hands, they could be placed and removed without anyone noticing, like a magician's sleight of hand. The pots themselves were oval, shaped to fit the female form and to nestle neatly between layers of fabric without tipping. Some had lids to control odor, but just as importantly, to send a silent signal to household staff about whether they needed emptying. This was not a matter of privacy, as we know it today. In most Victorian households, the idea of a separate, personal bathroom was a luxury reserved for the very rich. For everyone else, toileting was a communal reality. Even in grand homes, women often relied on retiring rooms at social gatherings, dedicated spaces where a lady could attend to her needs in the company of other women, assisted by staff trained for speed and discretion. These attendants were like pit crews at a race. A few quick adjustments, the chamber pot placed just so, skirts repositioned, and the operation completed before anyone in the ballroom noticed your absence. The act itself required a particular skill set. There was no lifting the skirts in a simple gesture. 20 pounds of layered fabric and steel didn't respond to haste. Instead, you learned to shift your weight just so, letting the layers fall in a way that created a hidden pocket of space beneath. A chamber pot could be slipped into place, your skirts forming an instant privacy screen, allowing you to finish the task without removing a single garment. Done correctly, it was a seamless performance. Done poorly, and the consequences range from personal embarrassment to the ruin of an expensive gown. And yet, beneath all this, another secret shaped the Victorian bathroom experience. For much of the era, women often didn't wear underwear as we would recognize it today. The sheer bulk of their skirts and petticoats was considered sufficient for modesty. But fashion could be treacherous. A gust of wind in the street could catch your crinoline like the sail of a ship, flipping it upward in an instant and revealing more than you'd ever intended. These public mishaps, though mortifying, eventually inspired a new garment, the split-crotch drawer. Two separate pant legs, joined only at the waistband, with an opening in the middle, allowed for modesty in public, yet provided easy access for using the toilet without removing undergarments. This simple innovation revolutionized bathroom logistics, especially at events where a lady might be away from home for hours. Of course, toileting was just one part of a larger hygiene puzzle. Toilet paper as we know it was almost unknown until the very end of the Victorian period. In its place, people used whatever was available: newspaper scraps, catalogue pages, soft cloths that could be washed and reused. Wealthier women preferred fine linen squares, laundered with other household linens and kept in immaculate condition by teams of servants. Menstruation brought yet another layer of complexity. Cloth pads held in place by a belt, the so-called tea bandage, were common, though materials varied from soft rags to moss or sheep's wool. Women changed these frequently, often many times a day, always in silence, and always without disturbing the carefully balanced architecture of their attire. This daily reality required more than just patience. It demanded resilience. Imagine attending a formal dinner, corset laced so tight your ribs ache, knowing that a bathroom visit means disappearing to a retiring room, navigating a maze of skirts and hoops, and trusting someone else to help without drawing attention. Imagine doing this not once, but every day, for years. The discipline it took to move gracefully under these constraints is almost unimaginable to us now. And yet, for Victorian women, it was simply life. What makes their story so remarkable is not only the constraints they endured, but the ways they adapted. They developed a code of signals among friends to indicate the need for a bathroom break without ever saying the words. They trained servants in the subtle art of assistance. They learned exactly how long they could go without relief, adjusting their intake of liquids and timing their day around the opportunities available. Every outing was calculated, every movement planned with quiet precision. These women were more than fashion icons, they were logistical geniuses operating within an unyielding social framework. They mastered the art of solving problems without letting the world see the effort, turning something as awkward and inconvenient as a bathroom visit into a ritual of poise. In the process, they created a hidden culture, one that thrived in whispers, in shared glances, in unspoken understanding. And it's this culture, this blend of elegance and ingenuity, that makes the story of how Victorian women went to the toilet in those massive dresses not just shocking, but deeply human. If the daily reality of managing these enormous dresses at home was complicated, the challenge multiplied once you stepped into the public sphere. Outside your own walls, every movement was on display. The street was a stage, and Victorian society a relentless audience. The moment you emerged, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones and the clink of boot heels on stone echoed against your skirts, a constant reminder that space was not yours to control. Navigating narrow pavements or bustling market lanes meant angling your crinoline so as not to catch on the edges of shop displays or brush against the coats of passing gentlemen. And through all of this, you carried the quiet awareness that at any moment nature might call, and that answering it would require a blend of cunning, speed, and discretion. Public facilities, as we'd call them now, were rare and often rudimentary. For the few wealthy enough to attend grand social gatherings, there might be retiring rooms, elegant lounges with upholstered chairs, side tables, and attendants whose sole purpose was to assist. In these spaces, the complicated operation of using the toilet became almost ceremonial. You would step behind a folding screen or into a curtained alcove, the rustle of your skirts masked by polite conversation outside. A chamber pot, already prepared, would be positioned precisely. The attendant's hands, quick and practiced, would adjust your layers just enough to make space, while keeping the heavy hoops of the crinolines steady so they did not sway or topple. The goal was not just efficiency, it was invisibility. You would emerge moments later, as if nothing had happened, ready to glide back into the crowd with your dignity fully intact. For those of lesser means, however, the options were far less refined. In crowded city streets, public convenience often meant little more than an alleyway or a backyard privy shared among dozens of tenants. The privacy these offered was questionable at best, and the thought of manoeuvring a crinoline into such a space bordered on absurd. Some women resorted to carrying portable chamber pots concealed in carpet bags or hidden beneath their skirts, especially when travelling long distances by train or carriage. These travelling commodes were an unspoken necessity for journeys where no proper facilities could be expected. Fashion itself sometimes seemed to conspire against comfort. The wider the skirts became, the more impractical it was to move quickly or discreetly toward any private space. The cage crinoline, while revolutionary in lightening the weight of petticoats, created a rigid frame that could not simply be lifted. Instead, the woman inside had to master subtle shifts of her body, turning her hips just so, angling her knees inward, to create an opening wide enough for a chamber pot without disturbing the overall silhouette. It was a learned skill, as much a part of a young lady's training as learning to dance or embroider. Mothers, sisters, and trusted maids passed down these methods quietly, never discussed outside the intimate female sphere. The matter of undergarments played an equally crucial role. As mentioned, the invention of split-crotch drawers was not a frivolous fashion trend, but a practical revolution. With this garment, a woman could remain fully clothed while relieving herself, the opening perfectly aligned for access without unfastening or pulling down anything. For those wearing them daily, it was second nature. For those unfamiliar, the arrangement seemed shocking, even scandalous. But practicality always finds a way, and Victorian women quickly embraced anything that could make the process faster and more discreet. Of course, toileting was just one aspect of the broader hygiene system in a world before modern plumbing. The disposal of waste, especially in urban areas, was a constant challenge. In many parts of London, waste was collected by night soil, men, workers who carted it away under cover of darkness. In other towns, chamber pot contents were tossed into cesspools or directly into the street, often accompanied by the infamous warning cry, "Gardez l'eau," watch out for the water. For a lady of means, these crude practices were hidden behind layers of household service, but the smells, the risks, and the realities of sanitation could never be entirely escaped. Inside the home, servants bore the brunt of the work. A lady's maid not only assisted with the process itself, but also ensured that chamber pots were discreetly removed, emptied, scrubbed, and replaced before anyone could notice. In households of the wealthy, each bedroom might have its own concealed commode, but in smaller homes, one pot might be shared among several family members. The rhythms of daily life revolved around when pots were emptied, when laundry was done, and when fabrics could be aired out to prevent odours from clinging. Then there was menstruation, a subject so taboo that even close friends rarely spoke of it aloud. Managing it beneath layers of heavy skirts and steel hoops required both planning and courage. Cloth pads, pinned or belted into place, had to be changed frequently, sometimes a dozen times in a day during heavier flows. Without the privacy of a personal bathroom, women adapted by carrying folded cloths hidden in small reticules or within layers of their gowns, slipping away to change them in retiring rooms or private corners of the home. Every action was conducted in silence. the mechanics of it masked by the rustle of skirts and the hum of social chatter. The sheer discipline this demanded shaped the way Victorian women lived their days. They learned to ration water and tea before attending a long event, to avoid situations where access to a retiring room was uncertain, and to time their routines around the help of servants. Even spontaneous laughter or surprise had to be tempered. An ungraceful movement could upset the delicate balance of crinoline and skirt, revealing more than intended or tangling the structure in a way that made quick retreat impossible. Despite all of these limitations, many women carried themselves as though unbothered, even serene. They cultivated a kind of dual existence: the public self, poised and unflappable, and the private self, navigating the complex machinery of daily life with quiet expertise. To modern eyes, it may seem an exhausting performance, but within the rigid framework of Victorian society, mastery over these hidden challenges was a badge of honour. It was proof that one could maintain grace, no matter the obstacle, that appearances could be preserved even under the most impractical of circumstances. Travel, too, added layers of complexity. Long carriage rides meant relying on roadside inns or secluded spots shielded from public view. Train travel introduced its own awkwardness. Early railway lavatories were cramped, primitive, and ill-suited for accommodating a woman in full skirts. Some avoided them entirely, preferring to endure discomfort rather than wrestle their crinoline into such confined spaces. Others adapted, learning to fold their hoops just enough to pass through narrow doors, or travelling with a companion to help manage their skirts. All of this unfolded against a backdrop of strict social rules. Victorian etiquette manuals rarely, if ever, addressed the practicalities of toileting, but they enforced a code of conduct that shaped every choice a woman made. Public discussion of bodily needs was considered vulgar. Even the faintest hint of urgency could be taken as a lapse in self-control. Within these unspoken boundaries, women became experts at reading each other's subtle cues: a certain tilt of the head, a deliberate pause in conversation, a slow step toward the edge of a room. What emerges from these details is a portrait not of weakness or helplessness, but of adaptation. Every chamber pot discreetly used, every crinoline skillfully manoeuvred, every quiet arrangement with a maid or friend was an act of problem-solving. This was a world that demanded mastery over one's body, clothing, and surroundings at all times. And Victorian women, constrained by fashion and expectation, met that demand with creativity that was both practical and deeply human. If the mechanics of toileting in the Victorian era were already an art form in private homes and semi-public spaces, the complications multiplied when you added social prestige into the equation. At high society events, the glittering balls, the charity galas, the theatre nights in London or Bath, every moment was a performance, and the stakes for maintaining composure were even higher. In these circles, the concept of retiring during the evening was woven into the rhythm of the event itself. Ladies would drift away in pairs or small groups, their skirts whispering across polished floors as they slipped into lavish retiring rooms decorated with gilt mirrors, velvet settees, and discreetly placed attendants. These spaces were sanctuaries of composure, where the invisible ballet of lifting, arranging, and positioning could take place without the slightest breach of elegance. The attendants who staffed these rooms were professionals in all but name. Many had been trained from a young age in the unspoken codes of discretion. They could assist with a corset's hidden laces, or a crinoline's stubborn tilt without uttering a single word, moving with a practiced choreography that made the process appear effortless. A truly skilled attendant could manage the entire operation, from positioning the chamber pot to smoothing the skirts afterward, in less time than it took the orchestra in the ballroom to finish a single waltz. And all of this was accomplished in near silence, with nothing to betray the nature of the visit when the lady re-emerged. These elaborate social rituals masked a truth that would have shocked the more delicate sensibilities of the era, For much of the 19th century, the idea of total bodily privacy was a modern fantasy, not a reality. Even in these refined settings, toileting remained a communal act in some sense, not in view of the public, but supported and facilitated by others. Your ability to move through it gracefully was as much a social skill as dancing or conversation. The crinoline itself, that cage of steel hoops and fabric tapes, dictated every move. It was both the problem and, strangely, part of the solution. Its rigid shape meant that, when carefully manoeuvred, it could form a discreet tent under which the chamber pot could be placed. The real challenge was avoiding any sudden shift that might reveal too much or upset the balance of the structure. If the hoops caught against furniture or twisted unexpectedly, the result could be an ungraceful entanglement that might take minutes to untangle, a minor disaster in the middle of a social gathering. Women learned to sense the crinoline's movement, the way sailors sense the roll of the sea, adjusting their bodies in anticipation of its sway. For those attending events in less accommodating venues, perhaps a dinner in a private home without a formal retiring room or an outdoor garden party, improvisation became essential. Some hosts would discreetly set aside a bedroom with a washstand and chamber pot for their female guests, appointing a maid to assist. In the countryside, a secluded corner of the garden might be pressed into service, a reminder that even among the wealthy, the trappings of elegance were always built upon a foundation of practicality. Meanwhile, the less affluent had their own systems. A working-class woman wearing a simpler but still voluminous skirt might rely on a basic privy, often located outdoors and shared by multiple families. The privacy was minimal, the sanitation questionable, and in winter the conditions could be brutally cold. Yet even here, the split-crotch drawers or lack of undergarments entirely meant that the basic mechanics of relieving oneself remained surprisingly similar across the social divide, an adaptation born of necessity, not luxury. In cities, the noise and congestion brought new hazards. A gust of wind could sweep through a street like a hand, flipping open a fan, catching a skirt and lifting it high enough to scandalize passers-by. Newspapers occasionally printed scandalized accounts of such indecent exposures, though they were rarely blamed on the woman herself. Instead, the fashion was at fault, as if the crinoline were a mischievous creature with a will of its own. This risk reinforced the importance of quick, discreet toileting in public spaces. The longer one spent adjusting layers, the greater the chance of some unpredictable mishap. The tools of hygiene were equally telling of the era's limitations. Before the late Victorian introduction of commercially produced toilet paper, cleaning oneself required improvisation. Cloth wipes, folded neatly and laundered afterward, were the standard among the wealthy, while those with fewer resources made do with whatever was available: torn newspaper, catalogue pages, even soft moss or leaves when outdoors. These were not mere inconveniences. They shaped the very rhythm of toileting, adding steps and considerations foreign to the modern experience. Then there was the monthly reality that society never acknowledged, but every woman lived with. Menstruation demanded not only physical management, but complete secrecy. Pads made from folded linen, flannel, or cotton were secured with a belt, adjusted beneath layers of clothing in ways that made the operation appear invisible. In public, changing them meant retreating to a retiring room or private corner, timing the act between dances, speeches, or social calls. The skill was in ensuring that no one, not even one's closest friends, could tell. Yet perhaps the most extraordinary thing about all of this is not how difficult it was, but how seamlessly it became part of life. From the outside, a Victorian woman appeared to move through her day with unbroken elegance, whether she was attending a crowded theatre performance or hosting an afternoon tea. Beneath that polished surface, however, she was constantly engaged in a series of quiet calculations. When will I next have access to a chamber pot? How much liquid have I had to drink? Will I need to ask my maid for assistance before the next set of dances? These decisions were never voiced, yet they shaped everything from a woman's social calendar to her choice of clothing for the day. The width of the crinoline, the weight of the fabric, even the placement of decorative trims could influence how easily the skirts could be maneuvered when the moment came. Over time, these considerations became second nature, as much a part of dressing and living as fastening a brooch or choosing the right gloves. And while we might be tempted to see all this as a symbol of restriction, it is also a testament to resourcefulness. Within the constraints of fashion, architecture, and social etiquette, Victorian women devised a functioning system for one of life's most basic needs. They made it work in ballrooms and in back alleys, in glittering salons, and on long train journeys. They adapted, innovated, and perfected the art of going to the toilet in those massive dresses until it was no longer a burden, but simply part of the day's hidden choreography. In the end, these quiet triumphs of adaptation were invisible to the world, and that was the point. No one outside the inner circle of women and their trusted attendants ever saw the reality. To the rest of society, the lady was simply composed, graceful, and untouchable. But behind the scenes, she was also a tactician, a manager of time and space, and the commander of a wardrobe that doubled as both a prison and a shield. The shocking truth isn't just how she went to the toilet in those massive dresses, it's how she made it look effortless. By the late Victorian period, the elaborate dance of toileting within layers of architecture like fashion had become so normalized that it was almost invisible to the women who performed it. What had once been a set of awkward compromises had evolved into a refined set of routines, perfected over years and passed down quietly from one generation to the next. It was not just an act of necessity, it was a daily ritual embedded so deeply into a woman's life that she could perform it without conscious thought. The chamber pot, the crinoline shift, the resettling of skirts. Each step followed the same practiced rhythm, honed to preserve dignity and grace in the most undignified of circumstances. In well-to-do households, the system was supported by an entire unseen network of labour. Behind the grand drawing rooms and polished dining tables, there existed a quieter world of laundresses, seamstresses, and ladies' maids, each responsible for maintaining the machinery of a woman's wardrobe. A maid would know precisely when her mistress might require assistance, anticipating needs with an almost uncanny intuition. She would be there to discreetly remove the chamber pot for cleaning, to restarch the undergarments that formed the barrier between skin and silk, and to keep the retiring room ready at a moment's notice. This invisible service ensured that, to the outside world, a lady's existence seemed effortless, the epitome of composure. But the same precision was demanded of women without such support. In smaller homes, where servants were few or entirely absent, the entire burden of managing these elaborate garments fell on the wearer herself. She might have to empty her own chamber pot, launder her own linens, and repair the tears or breaks in her crinoline caused by the day's movements. In these circumstances, efficiency became essential. A woman learned to strip away the unnecessary steps, developing her own shortcuts, perhaps a slightly looser lacing on the corset to allow more freedom of movement, or a preference for skirts made of lighter fabrics that could be shifted with less effort. These were personal adjustments, invisible to outsiders, but crucial to surviving the daily demands of Victorian dress. For those who travelled frequently, the challenges grew even more complex. Ocean voyages, with their cramped cabins and shared facilities, demanded an entirely different set of adaptations. The movement of the ship could turn the simple act of positioning oneself over a chamber pot into a precarious balancing act. Train travel, though faster, was hardly more comfortable. Early railway toilets were primitive, with narrow doorways and tiny compartments ill-suited to the wide sweep of a crinoline. Women often had to enter sideways, fold their hoops inward, and arranged their skirts with the precision of a stagehand resetting scenery between acts. It was exhausting work for something modern travellers barely think about. The irony was that while fashion drove these impractical designs, fashion also eventually provided the solution. By the 1880s, the exaggerated crinoline had begun to give way to the bustle, a more compact structure that still created the desired silhouette, but allowed for greater mobility. This shift in style did not happen in isolation. It was the result of decades of quiet resistance and adaptation by women who had lived with the impracticality of the earlier designs. In many ways, the evolution of dress was a direct reflection of the daily negotiations women made between the demands of style and the realities of living in it. Yet even as the silhouette changed, the culture of discretion remained. Victorian etiquette treated bodily needs as a topic beneath public discussion, and this silence shaped the way women interacted with one another. There were no open conversations, no published guides on how to manage a crinoline in the retiring room. Instead, knowledge passed in whispers. A mother demonstrating to her daughter how to shift her weight, a friend giving a subtle signal across a ballroom floor that now might be the right time to retreat, a maid teaching a new hire, the delicate art of lifting layers without revealing a single inch more than propriety allowed. It is easy to think of these women as oppressed by their clothing, trapped in a world designed to make life unnecessarily difficult. And in many ways, they were. But to stop there would be to miss the other side of the story, the ingenuity, adaptability, and quiet authority that came from mastering this daily complexity. These women were not passive victims of fashion. They were active problem solvers, inventors of personal systems that turned the impossible into the ordinary. In that sense, every discreetly managed trip to the toilet was not just a matter of hygiene, it was an assertion of control over a world that demanded constant performance. The working class experience underscored this point even more sharply. While wealthy women had the benefit of hidden facilities and trained attendants, their poorer counterparts often dealt with open privies, shared yards, and public water pumps. The conditions were harsher, the privacy more limited, but the need for discretion was no less pressing. A factory girl wearing a simpler skirt still had to find ways to relieve herself without scandal, often timing her needs around the few sanctioned breaks in the working day. And when she returned home, she might be the one responsible for laundering the family's linens and keeping their shared chamber pot clean, a reminder that, for all the elegance of high society, the basic realities of Victorian life were universally demanding. By the turn of the century, technological change began to chip away at these routines. The spread of indoor plumbing, flush toilets, and running water promised a future in which toileting could be private, efficient, and vastly more hygienic. But for much of the Victorian era, such luxuries were rare. The overwhelming majority of women, rich or poor, still relied on the same strategies their mothers and grandmothers had used, modified only by the slow evolution of fashion. The skill lay not in avoiding the constraints, but in mastering them so completely that the world never saw the effort behind the grace. And perhaps that is the most revealing truth of all. When we look at portraits of Victorian women, their faces composed, their gowns magnificent, it is tempting to imagine that this elegance was effortless. But hidden beneath the silken lace was a constant negotiation with reality, 1,000 small adjustments to maintain dignity while tending to the most basic human need. The shocking part isn't just the method itself, it's the fact that they succeeded so completely in keeping it invisible. By the time evening came and the laces of the corset were finally loosened, the hoops unfastened and the skirts laid aside, there was a release not just of fabric but of the constant vigilance that came with wearing it. For a brief moment, a Victorian woman could breathe freely, move without calculation, and tend to herself without the elaborate choreography of the day. Tomorrow, She would lace up again, step back into her public role, and repeat the performance, and no one outside her own household would ever know the quiet skill it took to make it look so easy. When we step back and look at the daily lives of Victorian women, it becomes clear that their experience of something as simple as going to the toilet was inseparable from the broader world they inhabited, a world built on strict codes of behavior, rigid social hierarchies, and a relentless emphasis on appearances. The bathroom rituals we now find shocking or amusing were not eccentricities to them, they were as ordinary as buttoning a glove or setting a tea tray. This was an era where propriety mattered more than convenience, where elegance was maintained at any cost, and where even the most private acts were shaped by the public expectations of the time. The massive dresses were not just garments, they were architectural statements. They announced a woman's status before she even spoke, their size and craftsmanship, a visual proof of wealth and refinement. Yet the very same dresses that dazzled guests in a ballroom could become obstacles the moment biology made its demands. And so, the Victorian woman became a master of adaptation. She learned to bend her body within the rigid confines of steel hoops, to move her skirts in ways that shielded her actions, and to employ clothing innovations, like the split-crotch drawers, that allowed her to meet necessity without surrendering an inch of decorum. This ingenuity was not just physical, but psychological. Maintaining grace under such constant constraint required a kind of discipline few of us can imagine today. You had to be aware of your body at all times, the position of your feet, the sway of your skirts, the line of your posture, because even the smallest slip could expose what society demanded you keep hidden. You had to plan your day around access to retiring rooms or chamber pots, monitor your intake of liquids before long journeys or events, and read the subtle signals of other women to coordinate discreet retreats. This was not simply dressing for the day, it was preparing for battle, with fabric and etiquette as both armour and weapon. The ingenuity of Victorian women extended to the management of hygiene itself. Without modern toilet paper, without disposable sanitary products, without the privacy of personal bathrooms, they relied on systems that were both practical and surprisingly sustainable by today's standards. Soft linen cloths were laundered and reused, their care entrusted to the household staff who maintained the unseen machinery of daily life. Menstrual management relied on homemade pads, carefully secured with belts or pins, changed frequently and with a discretion that bordered on invisibility. Even in the most refined homes, these routines demanded labour, planning, and the constant quiet cooperation of women with one another. It is tempting to see these hidden bathroom strategies as a relic of a less enlightened age, but in reality they tell us something profound about human adaptability. Faced with a set of conditions that made even basic needs complex, Victorian women didn't crumble under the weight of impractical fashion. They found ways to live fully within it. They refined their methods until they could dance for hours at a ball, travel across the country by train, or host a dinner for 20 without anyone suspecting the effort required to maintain their composure. What might seem shocking to us today was, for them, simply part of the daily performance of life. The economic ripple effects of this hidden labour were considerable. Maintaining such elaborate wardrobes required entire industries, the laundresses who scrubbed linen cloths and undergarments, the dressmakers who repaired tears in skirts and reinforced seams worn by constant movement, the furniture makers who crafted elegant commodes and hidden chamber pot cabinets, the manufacturers who designed and improved the pots themselves to make them more stable, more discreet, more efficient. The act of going to the toilet, hidden behind silk and steel, was supported by an entire economic ecosystem. There is also the question of how these realities shaped the pace and patterns of Victorian social life. Grand events were carefully structured to allow moments for retreat, with music and conversation serving as cover for the quiet comings and goings of guests to the retiring rooms. Travel schedules were planned with stops at places that could accommodate the needs of women in full dress. Even the architecture of homes reflected this necessity, with strategically placed rooms or furniture designed to hide the mechanics of toileting from view. In a sense, the entire social fabric of the Victorian era, its rhythms, its etiquette, its designs, carried the imprint of these unseen requirements. And yet, for all the challenges, there was pride in mastering them. To navigate a day in massive dresses without a single social misstep, without revealing the quiet operations that allowed you to maintain comfort and dignity, was an accomplishment. It meant you understood your own body, your clothing, and your surroundings so completely that you could control them rather than be controlled by them. It was a skill honed over years, and one that mothers were eager to pass on to daughters as part of their preparation for adult life. By the dawn of the 20th century, technology and changing fashions began to dismantle these rituals. The bustle replaced the cage crinoline, and then narrower skirts replaced the bustle. Indoor plumbing spread rapidly in cities, offering a level of privacy and sanitation unknown to earlier generations. Commercially produced toilet paper became widely available. Sanitary products began to take forms closer to what we know today. And yet, in these changes, something of the Victorian woman's quiet expertise was lost. The elaborate systems of cooperation, the unspoken codes, the subtle physical intelligence required to manage one's needs within the confines of a massive dress, these became obsolete almost overnight. Still, their legacy lingers. Modern fashion occasionally flirts with silhouettes that nod to the grandeur of the crinoline or the weight of layered skirts, but we no longer expect women to live their daily lives in such armor. We take for granted the ability to step into a bathroom and find privacy, running water, and a quick, efficient solution to our needs. And perhaps that is why the Victorian reality is so fascinating. It reminds us that not so long ago, these conveniences were unimaginable luxuries, and that the women who lived without them did so with a level of poise that defies belief. In the end, the shocking way Victorian women went to the toilet in those massive dresses is not just a curiosity of fashion history. It is a story about resilience, adaptation, and the human capacity to turn necessity into ritual. Beneath the layers of silk and steel hoops, behind the mirrors of the retiring rooms and the doors of the commodes, was a world of quiet ingenuity. These women managed the impossible every day, and they did it so well that almost no one noticed. That, perhaps, is their greatest triumph. That they could meet the most basic of human needs while maintaining the illusion that nothing at all was happening. It is easy to laugh at the impracticality of it all from our modern vantage point, but perhaps we should also admire it. For these women, grace was not the absence of difficulty. It was the ability to carry difficulty without letting it show. They made the crinoline, the corset, the chamber pot, and the endless choreography of their wardrobes serve them rather than the other way around. And in doing so, they left us a lesson that extends far beyond fashion, that even in the most restrictive circumstances, elegance is possible if you learn how to work within the rules, bend them quietly when necessary, and never let anyone see the effort behind the performance.